G'day! Welcome to the stream. It is me, Melody. Hello! I'm a bit worn out after work. But it's okay. It's okay. Today is gonna be another proofreading stream. Just because, well, I'm not done yet. This should be our last proofreading stream for at least a year, almost. Because we're almost done with the chapter. As of last night, I have proofread 375 pages out of the 405 that are in the chapter. So, unless I decide to do another stream tomorrow, which I probably won't, this should be our last one. Which I'm kind of glad for, because I'm kind of sick of proofreading. Like, last night I got through a whole bunch. Don't know how I did it. I did like double the amount I normally read. Which I'm happy for, because it meant things went faster. I'm hoping to have the chapter out this weekend. So I want to get like all of the proofreading stuff done by Friday night at the latest, and then post it on Saturday morning, or Saturday morning in my time zone. I know time zones are different. For those of you who want to read what's already done, prologue and chapters 1 and 2, you can check my Wattpad. It's also available on my DeviantArt. I've got all of them linked in like my Twitch page or whatever. But yeah, that place has just got this novel at the moment. Don't really have anything else to say. I just want to get into it. Actually, I'll put like a proper content warning up on screen, but because we're getting so close to the end, I should have mentioned it last time. Last time there was mention of murder and like description of the bodies. This time we may be getting close enough to the end. Oh, bump the table. We may be getting close enough to the end that we might see the execution of the culprit. Because as of last night, I reached the point where we've like pointed out the dude who's probably the culprit, and now we just need to, you know, prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. And the executions get a bit gruesome. So let's switch over to the game scene, and I'll put a content warning up on screen. Oh, I forgot to... Oh no, this is the wrong scene, I'm a dumbass. Here we are. Now let me add some text. CW. Okay, well we definitely need to make that smaller. Just do like this, I guess. Okay, let me actually... Where do I select the color? Can I only have white writing? I don't see an option for color. I guess I should have figured this out before stream. I kind of forgot. I'll do that size. That's a decent size. That doesn't look as blurry. Oh, there we are. There's the color. Dingle. Am I able to put like a... yeah, outline. In that case, I want the outline to be black, and I'll make the text white. make it easier to like stand out on the thing. Eh? Oh, wrong. Professional streamer, guys. Professional streamer. What? I probably should have just made the text itself larger instead of like the font size. But oh well. Okay, I did already read some of this page a bit last night, but I didn't get through the full page, so I'm just gonna start from the start. Oh boy, every time I go to do this, I forget that, like, oh, now I've got to do voices for the characters. And because of this scene, basically all the characters who are still alive are here. So that's going to be a lot of voices for me to do. I am unmuted, right? I did unmute myself? Yes. Hold on, why do I still have Discord open? Close that. Alright, let's get into it. How did Sybil's voice sound again? Because Naomi was worrying before about why the culprit didn't use the curtains. If Miles tried to use the front curtain to get something off his face, it'd just move out of the way because there's nothing solid behind it. If he used the back curtain, he'd be ramming his face into the wall. Well, it's a good thing I did reread this, because I did it again. I keep getting Miles and Marcus confused. Marcus's apron let him wipe. Jesus. Marcus's apron let him wipe his face against a solid surface that wouldn't just break his teeth. Come on, listen to me, or I can't do Miles's voice. Come on, listen to me already. I'm telling you I didn't do it. I can't shout, by the way. I just can't. Miles said, stamping his foot on the ground in an attempt to get everyone to let him actually say something. I'll even prove it. You'll see. We're listening, Miles. Clove said, sounding a little dejected. Kirito wanted to believe it was because he was seeing how it felt to be on the receiving end of a tantrum, but that was probably wishful thinking. Thank you. Miles took a deep breath to calm himself down before starting his refutation of Kirito's accusation. That sounds a bit wordy. His rebuttal to Kirito's accusation. Okay, so you know how Jennifer was tied up by her wrists and then hung up? Why is that giving me... Okay. It just doesn't want to go away, sure. Okay, so you know how Jennifer was tied up by her wrists and then hung up on the cupboard? I know, I couldn't have done that, remember? We talked about that at the start of the debate when Roxy was accusing me. I apologize, Miles' voice sounds like garbage. That was before we knew the culprit had an accomplice, though, Naomi stated. Marcus could have helped you with setting up the body. Where did it go? There. Marcus could have helped you with setting up the body, like Kirito helped me with getting her down. It seemed like she was fully on board with accusing Miles as well. Well, yeah, I guess that's possible. But Marcus was tied up too. I wouldn't have had anyone to help me there. And there's no way I could have tied him up there by myself. Yeah, Clove called out. Clove's voice is also going to be garbage, I apologize. Apparently still wanting to defend Miles. Plus, Miles and Marcus were super good friends. Why would Miles want to kill Marcus? All the more reason why they'd work together in the first place, Roxy said, still looking awfully smug. Miles may be stupid, but he probably wouldn't help just anyone commit murder. Hey, I'm not stupid. I'm just... Look, I didn't kill him, okay? Kirito shook his head. Sorry, but your proof just doesn't hold up, he said. There was something that had been bugging him about the way the bodies were arranged. But it wasn't until now that Miles was using it to defend himself that he'd finally figured out what it was. What? What do you mean? You saying I could have hung him up by myself? My jaw has its limits, you know. I'm not saying that, Kirito stated, looking for the right image on his PDA. The problem isn't whether you could have tied them up and hung them. Why is that capitalized? The problem is whether they were even tied up in the first place. Almost immediately, the high tension seemed to diffuse, and Miles slumped forward. Okay, you lost me. You know, normally I'm buying whatever logic you're throwing out, but that just plain don't make sense, Noel stated, furrowing his brow. Yeah, it's pretty clear they were both hanging, Naomi added, awkwardly scratching the back of her head. She clearly didn't want to be going against Kirito, but even she couldn't follow where his logic had gone this time. Then maybe this will change your mind. Oh. Moved a little too far, I think. Oh no, it moved back up because I scrolled a different way. And maybe this will change your mind, Kirito stated, tapping the photo on his PDA that showed the way the bead curtain had wrapped around Marcus's wrists. There, see? He's tied up just like I said he was, Miles stated, performing a gesture that was probably supposed to be him pointing with his head. Take a closer look, Kirito said, shaking his head. The curtain... make it clear that which curtain we're talking about. The bead curtain isn't tied around his wrists, it's tangled. There's not a... That sounds better. There's no deliberate knots in there. He hadn't figured out what was odd about until now, but now it all made sense. The strings of beads were awkwardly twisted and tangled around Marcus's arms and each other, but there weren't any actual knots like the kind they'd seen at Jennifer's crime scene. The body arrangements weren't as identical as they'd first assumed. Oh, that's supposed to be like a quick sharp. Oh, is that why his body started slipping when I tried to move him? Naomi called out. Yeah, that's probably why. The tangles were able to hold him up, but moving him around caused the strings to start coming untangled again. Miles had heard enough. Or perhaps he just... stupid... The phone just vibrated to go like, hey... Frickin' weather warning. It's giving me a flood watch. It's not even raining right now. It's been raining heaps the past week, but right now it's been fine all day. Don't know what they're on about. Where were we? Miles had heard enough. Or perhaps he just didn't want Kirito to say anything more. Look, tied, tangled, it's all the same thing, really. It doesn't change anything. I still could have done it. I still couldn't have done it. It does change something, Kirito said, pointing across the ring, and at Miles to punctuate his statement. Because unlike knots, tangles aren't done deliberately. That doesn't change the fact that we still don't know how he did it, deliberate or not, Sybil stated, looking off to the side with a hand on her chin. Hey, weren't you one of the people who immediately jumped on the bandwagon? What gives? Roxy called out, crossing her arms. Apparently that statement had put a damper on her mood. I do still think Miles is guilty, Sybil clarified, meeting Roxy's gaze. But until we explained how Marcus ended up hanging there, Miles' defense holds up, and you know what happens then. Seal just refused to let the debate end because he still has plausible deniability, Tony said, a grim expression on his face.
Plausible nothing! I'm telling you I didn't do it! Why won't you just believe me so we can start looking for the real culprit?
Sybil ignored his pleas, however, simply turning back to face Kirito. Well, Kirito, do you have an explanation for this? She asked, gesturing at the photo of the beads around Marcus's arms. I might, Kirito said with a nod and a stern look. Stern look. Did I say stern? I'm pretty sure I did.
What? Come on, you totally just made things up now.
Miles called out, practically leaning over his podium as he spoke. You've really thought of something? Ace asked, the slightest hint of expressiveness appearing on his face. His eyebrows raised just a little, perhaps unable to completely contain his surprise. Seeing that, cracking Ace's emotionless mask just the tiniest bit, that was enough to give Kirito the push he needed to go through with this. Oh, I'm not used to scrolling normally. I usually scroll with the arrow keys, but that results in like really jerky movement. It's admittedly a bit of a long shot, but I just have to show it's possible, right? Considering there's probably no way to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, that'll probably do for now. Sybil replied with a nod, her expression starting to soften. Kirito appreciated the fact that she seemed... Why did I write she twice? That she seemed to have enough faith in him to actually see this through. Well, let's hear it. Kirito took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, holding up what he'd retrieved from it. My theory has to do with what's written in the autopsy reports.
The autopsy reports?
Miles called out.
What the heck do they have to do with anything?
Kirito was undeterred by Miles's interruption and continued to explain. There's only one part besides the name of the victim and where the body was found. Oh, there's only one part. There's only one part besides the name of the victim and where the body was found, this should be moved. There's only one... Put it here. There's only one part where Marcus and Jennifer's autopsies differ, besides the name of the victim and where the body was found, and that's the bruising. Marcus had light bruising across his back, right? Tony asked. Right. I didn't really get what the bruising had come from at first, but now that we've gone through everything we have in this trial, I might have an idea.
Oh, I get it. It's because Marcus fought with the culprit, right? So he probably got punched in the back or something.
Well... Marcus called out, seemingly trying to preempt Kirito's theory by giving one that was much more favorable for him.
Not sure how that'll really lead us to the culprit, though.
Kirito shook his head, having already been ready for that kind of rebuttal. According to the autopsy, he had evidence of light bruising across his upper back. Maybe I don't know medical terms, but it sounds to me like it covered his entire upper back. And only his upper back. And it wasn't particularly strong. Covered his entire upper back. How do I phrase that in a way that sounds a bit less awkward? Sounds to me like it covered his entire upper back. Only his upper back. His entire upper back and nothing else. and nothing else, and it wasn't particularly strong. That doesn't sound like the kind of bruise you'd get from a punch. But how would you get a bruise like that? Yulia asked, finally having the courage to stand up properly again. Marcus wasn't particularly big, but that's still a pretty big area to cover. That's true. Marcus would have needed to hit something pretty big. Marcus would have needed to be hit with something pretty big in order to bruise him like that. Or rather, he'd need to hit something pretty big. Kirito was met with a lot of confused stares for a moment. But the only one to give an audible reaction was Roxy. "Oh my god. You're not, are you?" she asked, practically giddy as she tried to hold back her laughter. Kirito did his best to ignore it and just continue with his explanation. If Miles was holding the skewer in his mouth, instead of in a hand like most people would, he'd practically have to throw his entire body weight behind it to stab Marcus, pushing him back and knocking him into the back wall. Kirito once again found himself pointing to emphasize the point he was making. It just felt like the right thing to do. That explains the bruising. That explains the bruising, Ace said, a hand on his chin. And the tangling. Well, if you were knocked back with enough force and you came to a sudden stop, what do you think would happen to your arms? They'd fly back behind you, Roxy proudly declared. Trust me, I've pushed enough kids into lockers to know. Right, Kirito mumbled, unsure how he should feel about the fact that Roxy was actively helping him now. In addition to that, Marcus could have been fighting with Miles at the time. I think would have is better than could have. Marcus would have been fighting with Miles at the time, so his arms would already have been up and swinging around. Hey? Oh, someone else went live. Just got an email from Twitch. Yeah. Actively helping him now. Yeah. Wait, who's saying this? Naomi. So in other words, Marcus's body ended up being hung up the same way as Jennifer's was, just because of random chance? Because he just happened to get tangled in the bead curtain when he fell back? It was all just random chance? Naomi asked, a sheer look of disbelief on her face. That's right. Which means even Miles could have hung Marcus up. Even Miles could have hung Marcus up like that. Because the presentation of the body was nothing more than a coincidence.
No way!
Marcus shouted, sounding more shocked than upset, as if he really didn't know that was what happened. This is goddamn ridiculous, Noel said, shaking his head. I take back what I said about the culprit deliberately misleading us. Sybil stated, her expression deadpan. He's just lucky like the last two.
Hey, it's still not certain that I did it.
Marcus called out, leaning over his podium towards Sybil.
It's all just a theory, you know. There's no evidence it actually happened.
Maybe not, but I think that was enough to convince anyone that might have still been on the fence. Kirito stated. With the time C gives us to investigate, it's more or less impossible for us to prove things beyond a shadow of a doubt, but we can still piece together things well enough to create a scenario. Do Americans say scenario or scenario? I'm gonna say scenario because it feels weird to say it the other way. We can still put things well enough to create a scenario that everyone's able to agree on. He paused for a moment to look around at the group, his eyes lingering on someone who'd still been defending Miles recently. Is anyone still not convinced? The room was mostly silent, the only noises being the occasional murmurs of disagreement as the group shook their heads, showing their approval of the scenario Kirito had put forth. The only person who had something important to say turned out to be the Clove. Turned out to be Clove, the very person Kirito's leaky gaze had lingered on. I guess it does kind of make the most sense that Miles was the culprit.
Hey, come on, Clove, don't be like that.
Miles pleaded, turning to face Clove.
Didn't you hear how ridiculous Kirito's theory was? I mean, random chance? There's no way.
But you were supposed to be meeting Jennifer today, weren't you? Clove said, twiddling his paws, on account of his costume having no thumbs to twiddle.
Well, yeah, but like I said, she never showed up. I left to go look for her, and after a while I ended up finding Marcus's body.
Man, we really fucking fell for a lie as obvious as that, huh? Roxy said with a shrug and a shake of her head.
It's not a lie, though.
Cut the shit. It's so obvious you and Marcus just waited for her to show up, and then you distracted her with your foosball shit while Marcus got the drop on her. Clove silently nodded along with Roxy's statement, making it clear that that was what he was trying to say. Making clear that he was trying to say the same thing before Miles started interrupting. I mean, you just so happened to leave before either Jennifer or Marcus showed up. Come on.
Oh yeah, you mean like how Marcus's arms just happened to swing back and get tangled in the bead curtain the same way Jennifer was hung up?
I need water. These voices are gonna kill me. Miles, Ace stated firmly, managing to silence all discussion just by raising the volume of his voice a little. Although Kirito and Naomi seemed to be the ones leading the pack when it came to logic, it was clear that without Jennifer, Ace's voice now held the most power. Well, perhaps besides Roxy, but her voice held power for a very different reason. I understand why you are upset. But Kirito has provided us with a plausible scenario. I guess I'm just going to say scenario when I'm using an American accent. That just seems to be what comes naturally. Or maybe I can still have Kirito use scenario since he's not actually supposed to be American. I just give him an American accent because I don't know what other accent to give him. I understand why you are upset. But Kirito has provided us with a plausible scenario that contains no contradictions, as far as we are currently aware, simply repeating the same lines on repeat. Simply repeating the same lines about how you aren't guilty will not be enough to convince anyone at this point, least of all C. As if to punctuate Ace's statement, C clapped her hands together. Better start talking, Tubby. Miles seemed to grit his teeth at being called Tubby again, the exact reaction C was probably aiming for, but he did have enough sense not to shout at her like he did at Roxy. If you wish for this debate to continue, then you will either need to find a contradiction in Kirito's argument, or present a new point that is yet to be explained. So if you're really innocent at this point, then you better come up with something quick. That's not Roxy's voice, but oh well, I already read the line. Roxy stated, wearing a somewhat menacing grin this time. Who am I kidding? If you're really innocent at this point, we're fucked.
Okay, you want some sort of counterpoint, huh? Alright. Alright, I'll give you one.
I think there should be a comma there. Miles declared, a determined look on his face, though Kirito could tell it was rather forced.
Just give me a second.
Miles, Clove said, sounding more than a little dejected. It was clear he wanted this to end.
Just give me a second, okay?
Miles shouted, displaying a side of him that hadn't previously surfaced. Not even when he was defending Brooke at the end of the previous debate. This wasn't just desperation, this was outright anger.
Miles, sometimes it's best to know when it's time to give in.
Noel stated, keeping his head down.
All you're doing is embarrassing yourself now. Let yourself go out with a little dignity.
Roxy chuckled at him.
I said, give me a second. How am I supposed to think when you're all talking over me?
Roxy chuckled at Miles's rage, evidently taking great pleasure in how upset he was. No wonder she was a bully. Kirito, however, had something very different to say. Let him think, he stated, his voice still sounding as determined as ever despite the circumstances. The fuck? Roxy shouted, raising an eyebrow, as her cocky expression immediately disappeared. Weren't you the one who accused him in the first place? I was, Kirito said with a small nod. From the evidence here, Miles seems like the most likely culprit, but that doesn't mean I want him to be guilty. After all we've been through, I don't really want anyone here to be guilty. So if I'm wrong, I want Miles to be able to tell me why I'm wrong. We'll never get anywhere if we just decide someone's guilty and then don't give them a chance to defend themselves. That last part wasn't intended as a dig at Roxy and her tendency to accuse someone right off the bat, but it seemed to get under her skin anyways. You heard him, Ace stated, replicating Kirito's nod. The floor... Oh yeah, we mentioned Kirito nodding. Miles, the floor is all yours.
Well, alright, thank you. Well, alright, thank you.
Miles mumbled, apparently not knowing how to take Kirito's apparent kindness.
Well, for one thing, I was the one who discovered the body, right? The chime played for me and everything. If I'm really the culprit, it wouldn't have gone off, right?
That's easily explained. Sybil stated without a moment's hesitation.
What? Hey!
Sorry, Miles, but she's right. Naomi said in a somewhat saddened tone. C said it herself. She still plays the chime for culprits if it would be inconvenient to not play it. She still could have played it for you. Come to think of it, the chime didn't actually play until after we heard you scream, didn't it? Tony stated, recalling what had happened during the body discovery. You probably saw Kirito and I leaving the library and thought it'd all be revealed if we saw you coming out of the auditorium. So you just screamed to make it look like you were the first person to find the body, and C played the chime accordingly. Tony's voice is so bad. Because like I have an Australian accent, but in order to make a more exaggerated Australian accent, I have to do the terrible accent that everyone else does when they attempt to sound Australian. Yeah. Well, damn. Maybe I gave you too little credit, Roxy said, her grin having returned, though looking a lot more relaxed this time. Do you have any other arguments, Miles? Kirito asked, immediately quietening the conversation again. Quietening the conversation. Barring any last-minute evidence, Kirito was sure he was right, but he wanted to make sure of it before C decided their time was up. Ideally, he would have liked Miles to confess and give up like Blaine did during the first debate, but it would be enough if they could at least show that he no longer had any rebuttals to make. Miles mumbled, clearly struggling to find something. If he truly wasn't guilty by this point, Kirito would be very surprised. Roxy seemed ready to berate him for his stalling, but was silenced before she could even say anything by Ace. But was silenced by Ace before she could even say anything. He seemed to be the only one capable of actually keeping her in line. After enough time that C began tapping her fingers on the arm of her throne, seemingly moments away from calling the end of the debate, Miles suddenly shouted,
The pen! What about the pen?
"Yeah, what about the pen?" Roxy grumbled, not understanding what Miles seemed to be excited about.
We still haven't found where the pen went. Jennifer's pen. I mean Alex's pen. The Jennifer had.
"We already discussed that," Null stated with a shake of his head. "The culprit took it in order to create confusion. Around the real murder weapon." While Kirito wasn't exactly fond of simply dismissing things as being done as a distraction or to create confusion, it really did seem to be the case this time, given the fact that C seemed to have played into it too with the way the autopsies had been written.
Okay, so where's the pen now? Why didn't we find it?
Miles asked, looking almost a little smug. "Obviously the culprit still has it," Sybil stated, glaring daggers at Miles, perhaps irritated by the way he was dragging things out. "The culprit being you."
Are you sure about that? You're free to search me if you want. You won't find anything, though. I don't even use my pockets. Kinda hard to get stuff out of there when you don't have arms, you know.
"He's weirdly confident about this," Chloe said, tapping his fingertips together nervously, or at least as close as he could get to his fingertips with his costume in the way. "Something tells me we won't find anything if we search him," Naomi stated, furrowing her brow. "Why does this fucking pen even matter? We already know he did it."
"'Cause he ain't gonna let us vote until we solve everything,"
Noel said, a stern expression on his face.
She's probably getting excited just thinking about how we're gonna get out of this one.
"I will neither confirm nor deny," C stated, doing absolutely nothing to hide the grin on her face, or the way she was rubbing her hands together giddily. Look, if he hasn't got it, then he must have chucked it somewhere. Who gives a shit?"
"Unfortunately, that isn't possible,"
Ace said with a shake of his head. "From the time we discovered the body up until he entered the room to investigate, Miles has been in my sights. He has not gone anywhere besides the auditorium and the game room, save for a brief trip across the yard. I didn't find the pen in the auditorium," Miles stated bluntly, looking off to the side with a frustrated look on her face. "I think I would have noticed if he tried to hide it somewhere in there anyway."
"We didn't find the pen in the game room, did we, Roxy?"
Noel asked, staring over at the troublesome girl he'd been keeping watch over. "No," Roxy said, crossing her arms and staring off to the side. "That just leaves the yard, but we all went out there. That just leaves the yard. But we all went out there when C said it was time for the debate," Tony stated, scratching his head as he tried to solve their latest dilemma. I feel like at least one of us would have noticed if it was lying in the grass or something." "But those are the only places he went. Where did Miles hide the pen?" Clove asked, looking around at the rest of the group.
"That's easy. I didn't hide it anywhere. Because I'm not the culprit.
Miles proudly declared, puffing his chest out. Are you sure he's not just bullshitting? Roxy asked. Maybe he's acting like a big shot so we don't actually search him. Search him if you want, but you're probably not going to find anything, Naomi said with a shake of her head. There's got to be something we're not thinking of, Yulia suggested. Something only Miles would think of. Like picking up the skewer in his mouth. Something only Miles would think of. Kirito mumbled to himself, a hand on his chin. There was definitely something there. Something coming forth from the recesses of his mind. Something he never would have even thought to use in a debate. That slow moment of realization did not go unnoticed. Do you have an idea, Kirito? Ace asked, evidently trying to draw that realization out into the open. I do, actually.
What? Come on, stop joking around,
Miles said dismissively, clearly trying to not flinch at Kirito's statement.
I don't have anywhere I could have hid a pen like that.
You do. Somewhere only you could use. Somewhere none of us would think of. Or at least, none of us would have thought of if you hadn't already shown us how you did it.
Hadn't already...
I'm not the only one lost, right? Tony asked, awkwardly looking around at the rest of the group.
Can't say I'm following either,
Noel replied with a shake of his head. Kirito was undeterred, though. No doubt they'd remember the same thing he had once he'd pointed out the location of the pen. Miles, the place where you hid the pen. Kirito paused before rearing his arm back and triumphantly pointing towards Miles, trying to give off the same energy he'd had during the first two debates, when he wasn't completely worn down by the deaths of his friends. Is it inside your own throat? His what? Clove shouted, his arms flailing all over the place. But that's... Yulia mumbled, her hands covering her mouth. His... Oh, you've gotta be fucking kidding me. Roxy said, stepping away from her podium for a moment as the realization washed over her. His swallowing trick, Naomi called out with a is it gasp or gasp? How do you say it with an Australian accent? See, the thing is, I watch too many Americans on YouTube and Twitch. So now there are some words that my pronunciation's all over the place. Naomi called out with a gasp. With a gasp? I don't know. Voicing the realization that most of the group must have been having right now. Kirito gave a small nod, before continuing his explanation. We've all already seen the way Miles is able to seemingly swallow small objects and hold them in his throat, ready to spit them out later. Small objects like a fork. Or perhaps a pen. Well, Miles, are you concealing the pen inside your throat? Ace asked. His voice was calm, but his gaze seemed very powerful, enough that Kirito was glad he wasn't the one being stared at. Miles said nothing for a moment, simply looking back at Ace, as emotionless as Ace. Oh, as emotionless as Ace normally was. I think staring back at Ace, looking as emotionless as Ace normally was. For a moment, Kirito wondered whether he had gotten it wrong. Perhaps Miles was mere moments away from opening up his mouth and revealing that his throat was empty. Perhaps they'd be back to square one. The wait was agonizing. However, his worries proved for naught. Instead of answering verbally, Miles reared his head back and took a deep breath and spit. Out of his mouth, a shiny metallic object came flying. He didn't bother to catch it like he did with the fork. Instead, it clattered down in the middle of all the podiums, revealing the object's identity. A brass pen, now covered in Miles' saliva. That's it, Roxy said, an uneasy expression on her face. It seems she wasn't hadn't expected Miles to simply give up like that.
Well, what am I supposed to do? You've already figured everything out. It's not like I can just keep denying it.
I mean, you could have, Naomi stated with a small shrug. The whole reason we didn't search you is because you were way too confident about not having the pen on you.
Yeah, well, that can only last so long. Well, yeah, but
I can only keep up the act for so long. I wanted to include an allusion to acting in there, because I don't think I explicitly stated it anywhere, but the reason that Miles is able to, conceal this for so long and not, just blatantly give it away is because his best friend is an actor, and he's picked up a few things over the years.
I mean, Roxy was about ready to search me anyway, you know? It was only a matter of time before someone opened up my mouth and took a look inside.
So you did it? Kirito asked, the energy now gone from his voice. He was more than ready to put this debate behind him once and for all. You're the one who killed Marcus?
Yes,
Miles stated, his head hung low.
I killed him.
But why? Yulia asked, her hands held close to her chin, evidently doing her best to keep her head up and her eyes on Miles. Weren't you and Marcus friends? And you and Jennifer were... Yulia was suddenly cut off by the sound of a hand slapping down on something hard, directing everyone's attention towards the woman on the throne. Hey, aren't you forgetting something? She called out, staring specifically at Yulia. The fact that Yulia hadn't hid behind her podium again was nothing short of a miracle. By the way, I call them podiums. I learned recently, apparently that's the wrong word. I should be calling them, stands or lecterns or whatever. Because podiums are the things you stand on at the end of a race.
Is this really necessary?
Noel asked, glaring at their host as he usually did. Of course it's necessary. You don't just not hold a medal ceremony at the Olympics because one team blitzed the competition. The fact that you already know the outcome doesn't take away from the spectacle of it all. Sorry. Kirito wasn't exactly sure that what she'd said. The thing is, I feel like that would have worked well with a double that. Wasn't sure that that was an apt metaphor. The problem is, you can't get the different emphasis there through text. It just looks like that. Wasn't exactly sure that what she'd said was an apt metaphor, but C's choice of imagery was the least of his concerns right now. Just get it over with, he stated, wanting this to be done as much as anyone else did. If you insist, C said with a shrug and a grin before diving into her usual speech. Gather around, folks. It's time for the moment you've been waiting for. It's voting time. Will your selection be right, or will you choose wrong? Only time will tell. And that's where we're going to end it. We got through almost 9 pages. And the reason I'm ending it now is because dinner's ready and I want to eat. We didn't get into the gore. But we did have the potential mention of murder. So let's go back over to the chat scene real quick. Okay, so I'm probably not going to be streaming tomorrow. I suppose I could, but I feel like I don't really need it. So I'm just gonna proofread off stream. And my next scheduled stream is actually over on YouTube. It's on Friday at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. I'll tweet it out. I'll tweet out the waiting room and have like alternate time zones in there if you don't know. If you don't know when that is for you, we're going to be playing Zuma. Zuma Deluxe. Hopefully I can do better than I did last time. Anyway, I don't think I have anyone watching right now, so we're not going to bother with a raid. So that's all. Thanks for watching. Otskame, bye bye.